Welcome to Buddha Bedtime Stories. The night is a temple, and you are safe within it. You've done enough today, thought enough, tried enough. Now it's time to be enough, just as you are. Tonight's stories were never meant for entertainment. They were shared in moments like this, between firelight and silence, between breath and insight. They are simple, ancient, and powerful in their simplicity. Before we begin, I invite you to pause. Where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you now? When we share these quiet details, we weave a larger circle, one held together not by urgency, but by rest. The stories you'll hear don't require belief. They ask only for presence. Let them settle into you like snow falling on still water. No need to interpret, no need to analyze. Just allow them to be and to become something in you. Inhale gently now. Exhale fully. Let the door of the mind fall open, and into that open space, the first story will now enter. The river was wide and still, glass-like beneath the pale morning sky. Mist hovered just above the surface, curling and drifting like breath from a sleeping world. A single heron stood motionless at the water's edge, waiting for the ripples to still. On the far bank, the Buddha walked slowly toward the shore. His robe was the color of earth after rain, simple, unstained. In his hand, he carried only his bowl, and in his eyes there was a depth that made even the wind seem to pause. The monks had already gathered beneath the Bodhi trees. Some sat cross-legged on dry leaves. Others stood in quiet reflection, watching the river. Today's teaching would not be long, nor loud, but it would be remembered. The Buddha stepped to the edge of the river and sat upon a low stone. The current moved slowly behind him, and in that quiet, he told a story. There was once a man, he said, who lived by a river much like this one. Every morning he bathed at dawn. Every evening he listened to the wind hum through the reeds. And one day, as he meditated near the shore, he saw a small boat drifting toward him. A few monks turned their heads toward the water as if expecting to see it. The boat was empty, the Buddha continued. No oars, no sail, just a simple wooden vessel carried by the current. The man smiled. There was peace in its stillness. No demands, no conversation, no self to disturb the quiet. But weeks later, the Buddha said, as he sat again near the water, another boat appeared. It drifted toward him, slow, gentle, and quiet as before. He raised his hand slowly, but this time, there was a man in it. The listeners grew still, and as the boat drew closer, it veered slightly, striking the meditating man with a soft bump. The Buddha paused, and the man leapt up, furious. Some of the younger monks blinked. He shouted, the Buddha said. He scolded the other. He demanded to know why he had not steered, why he had disturbed his peace. There was a silence in the air now, a silence of recognition. But when the first boat struck him, when it was empty, he felt no anger. There was no one to blame, no insult to receive, no self to defend. He turned toward the water. Anger arises, he said, when we see another as the cause of our suffering, when we believe we have been wronged, when the self rises to declare, this should not have happened to me. The monks were very quiet now. But what if we saw all boats as empty? He asked. A breeze moved through the tall grasses. Somewhere, a bird called out once, then fell silent again. When another insults you, the Buddha said, they too are being carried by a current of pain, confusion, fear, conditioning. Just as the boat was moved by the river, they are moved by the winds of ignorance. He let the words settle. To shout at an empty boat, he said, is to shout at the river, to push the current with your hands, to exhaust yourself against what was never personal. A monk near the front, young, eager, lifted his gaze. His name was Tissa, and he had recently quarreled with another monk over the rules of chanting. Blessed One, he asked, but if someone harms us, deliberately, cruelly, is that not different than an empty boat? The Buddha nodded. Yes, intention matters, but even those who intend harm are caught in currents they do not fully see. He looked gently at Tissa. The man who lashes out is often protecting a wound. The woman who lies is often afraid. And when you react with anger, you are caught in your own boat, convinced it has a captain, steering by will. A senior monk, older with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, bowed slightly. I have learned, Lord, to hold my tongue, but the self still burns inside. I smile while feeling the fire of pride, of injury. The Buddha smiled gently. Then you have seen the fire. That is the first step. He reached down and picked up a small pebble. When a boat is struck, the water ripples, but it returns to stillness if we do not stir it further. He placed the stone down. Do not pretend there is no fire, but do not feed it. Watch it, know its shape, see how it arises, and know this: it does not belong to you. The river flowed steadily behind them. A real boat now passed in the distance, its oars dipping quietly, evenly. You are not the boat, the Buddha said. You are not the current. You are not even the river. He looked to the horizon where the morning sun had begun to rise. You are the witness, the space through which all of it flows. A few monks closed their eyes. To let go of the self is not to disappear, he said. It is to stop clinging to what is not you, the story, the injury, the name Dot. He drew a shape in the sand beside him, an open circle. When you no longer need to be right, you listen differently. When you no longer need to be seen, you observe. When you let go of I and mine, peace is not something you chase, it is what remains. That night, as the wind cooled and the scent of lotus drifted on the breeze, the monks sat beside the river. Tissa approached the elder monk he had quarreled with, bowed deeply, and said nothing. No apology, no defense, just the stillness of an empty boat. The elder bowed in return, and in that silence, something greater was restored. In the years that followed, the teaching of the empty boat would spread like a soft echo, across rivers, over mountains, into cities and quiet huts. Not as doctrine, but as insight. That much of what we suffer is born from the illusion of a fixed self. That the insult, the injustice, the anger are often just ripples in a river that does not know your name. And when you learn to see each passing vessel as empty, not meaningless but free of blame, then you too can drift more lightly, letting go, not to vanish, but to float, still, aware, unmoved by the waves of the world, like the Buddha that morning by the river, watching everything and holding nothing. A monk walked along a dusty trail, his robe fluttering slightly with each step. The morning air was clear, the sun warm but soft. A few birds called lazily from the treetops, but the monk's brow was furrowed. He had been sent to deliver a letter to a nearby monastery, and he was late. He had misread the schedule, taken the wrong turn, and now walked quickly, heart agitated beneath his robe. Each step struck the earth too hard. Each breath was shallow. His mind raced ahead. Will they think me careless? How could I have made such a mistake? I should have left earlier. What kind of monk forgets the path? Then he heard a voice behind him. Excuse me, Sir Monk. He turned to see a young boy, no older than 10, running up the path barefoot. He held something cupped in his palms. The monk paused. Yes? The boy stopped, panting, and held out his hands. Inside them sat a small, round pebble, no bigger than a thumbprint. It's beautiful, isn't it? The boy said. The monk looked down. It was smooth, flecked with tiny bits of crystal, glinting gently in the light. I found it near the stream, the boy said. It looked lonely. I thought maybe someone should notice. The monk smiled politely. That's kind of you. He began to turn away, but the boy looked up at him and said something that stopped him mid-step. Did you see any of the flowers you passed today? The monk blinked. What? The boy tilted his head. You've walked almost a mile. The path is full of little blue flowers, but your robe is dusty and your eyes are tight. You didn't see any of them, did you? The monk looked down at the pebble again. Then slowly, he sat on a flat rock at the side of the path. The boy grinned and plopped down beside him, offering the pebble again. And the monk, still holding the unopened letter, took it gently in his hand. This is the story of mindfulness in ordinary things. Commentary. In Zen, we often speak of awakening as though it is some great flash of light or a sudden shift in consciousness. But often, awakening is small, like noticing a flower you've walked past for weeks, or hearing the sound of your own breath after a hard day, or holding a pebble that simply is. The monk had been walking as if his destination were the only thing that mattered. His hurry had made him blind. Not because he lacked wisdom, but because he had left the present moment behind in favor of imagined shame and future apologies. The boy, with no training and no robe, was more awake than he, not because he had studied sutras, but because he saw what was in front of him, and he shared it. There's a Zen phrase: the miracle is not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth. The monk delivered the letter later that day, but he took a different path back, slower, softer. He paused to notice the flowers the boy had spoken of, tiny blossoms with indigo petals, scattered like spilled paint across the roadside. He bowed to them, then reached into his robe and touched the small pebble still in his sleeve. After that, he kept it on the windowsill beside his mat, not as a relic, but as a reminder that awareness begins not with enlightenment, but with noticing what's already here. We spend our lives waiting for bigger signs, bigger truths, more impressive moments. But the sacred is everywhere, in the weight of a spoon, the hush of dusk, the rhythm of footsteps, the coolness of a cup before tea is poured. The boy in the story grew up. He never became a monk. But he taught his children to pause, to touch the bark of trees, to look into puddles after rain, to name the colors of the sky at sunset. And his children did the same. Sometimes the greatest teachers do not stand at the front of a hall. They kneel by a stream and lift a stone, so let the pebble teach you. Let it slow you down. Let it whisper. This moment matters too. He never spoke a word, not to the monks, not to the villagers, not even when invited to tea by the abbot himself. He simply bowed and walked and bowed again. They called him the silent pilgrim. He had no belongings except a small cloth bag and thick wooden sandals worn smooth from years on the road. His face was weathered by wind and sun. His back slightly bent, not from age, but from reverence. Because every third step, he stopped, placed his palms together, and bowed to the earth. Step, step, bow. Step, step, bow. He traveled like this for hundreds of miles, through rice paddies and dusty plains, through mountain passes and city streets, through cold rain, sharp sun, and falling snow. He never begged, never asked, never preached, only bowed. When he reached the gates of a remote temple high in the hills, a monk ran inside to announce, "The pilgrim has come." Curious, the monks gathered. Some stood with folded arms. Others watched from the steps. One scoffed, "What is this? A show?" Another whispered, "Surely he must be seeking merit or praise." But the abbot only smiled. "Wait. Watch." The pilgrim reached the stone path before the temple gate. Step, step, bow. His palms touched the gravel. His forehead met the earth. He rose slowly and continued. All morning he bowed up the path. By noon he had reached the courtyard. The air was silent, except for the soft crunch of gravel and the long breath between bows. Step, step, bow. By evening, he reached the base of the temple steps. He did not climb them. Instead, he bowed once more, then turned, and began his journey down the mountain. Step, step, bow. The monks were stunned. He never entered. He never asked to stay. He came all this way just to bow. The abbot nodded. And in bowing, he entered more deeply than any of us. This is the story of wordless devotion, of practice not performed, but lived in the marrow of each step. Commentary. In the West, we often think wisdom must be spoken. That truth arrives in grand lectures, eloquent teachings, powerful arguments. But sometimes the greatest teachings are silent. The silent pilgrim did not explain his path. He became it. With each bow, he gave himself to the moment, to humility, to gratitude, to presence. He bowed not to worship the earth, but to remember he belonged to it. In Buddhism, we bow not out of subservience. We bow to let go of the self, to surrender ego, to honor interbeing. The sky does not rise without the sun. The tree does not grow without the soil. You do not breathe without the generosity of everything around you. To bow is to remember that. The pilgrim didn't need a teacher. Every grain of dust was his teacher. Every blister, his scripture. Every bow, a verse in the sutra of the path. He asked for nothing, judged no one, corrected no teachings. He gave only his body, his time, his breath. That was his offering. That was his sermon. One monk, deeply moved, asked the abbot, "Should I walk like that? Bow like that?" The abbot said, "Not unless your heart is already bowing. It's not about copying the form. It's about sincerity. Some bow with their bodies and judge with their minds. Others bow with their actions and remain upright inside. But true bowing begins within. It is a quiet crumbling of pride, a surrender of the need to be seen, a softening into the now. There is a Zen phrase, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." The silent pilgrim had no preference for praise or obscurity, for arrival or delay. His goal was not the temple. His goal was the bow itself. Step, step, bow. Again and again, until there was no one left doing it. Only the gesture, only the giving, only the way. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you can bow too, not just with your body, but with how you listen, with how you wait, how you serve, how you show up for the dust on the floor or the silence in a friend's eyes. To bow is to soften, to slow, to remember what matters, and sometimes to say everything without a single word. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. It moved like time dash dash, patient, steady, clear. She had come to the water for answers, not about rituals, not about chanting, but about something deeper. Who am I? She had read sutras, memorized verses, and bowed each morning, but still, a knot remained in her chest. The old teacher, sensing her restlessness, came to sit beside her. They watched the water in silence for a while. Then he pointed to a single droplet clinging to a leaf above the current. It trembled, round, whole, complete. "Is that a drop of water?" the master asked. She nodded. "Yes," he smiled. Then a breeze blew. The droplet fell and joined the river below. The master turned again. "Now tell me, where is the drop?" This is the story of non-self, of how the self we cling to is like a drop, never separate, never alone. Commentary. We walk through life asking, who am I? What is me? Where do I go when I die? But these questions are like trying to bottle the river. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers. The Buddha taught that what we call a self is not fixed. No eternal soul, no unchanging core, only process, only flow, body, sensation, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These five aggregates arise and pass like waves. There is no boat, only current. The novice sat with this for many days. She stared at her reflection in the water, noticing how it changed when the wind blew, how it vanished when a stone was thrown, how it returned when the ripples faded. Was the reflection real? Yes. Was it solid? So too with the self. We exist, but not as a thing, as a movement, a flame, not a statue, a song, not a stone. One night, the novice had a dream. She stood before a vast river. She cupped water in her hands, holding it close, but it began to spill, to slip between her fingers, to return to the source. In the dream, she let it go and wept, not from sadness, but relief, because in letting go of the drop, she felt the whole river. When she woke, she wrote a single line in her journal. I am not a drop in the river, I am the river in a drop. This is the heart of rebirth too, not the soul traveling from body to body, but conditions unfolding, like water taking many forms, cloud, rain, stream, mist, but always water. You are not this name, not this face, not even this mind. You are this moment, arising from countless causes and dissolving into new ones. When the master was old and dying, the novice, now a teacher, sat by his side. She asked him if he was afraid. He smiled faintly and said, "A drop returns to the river. How can it fear?" Then he closed his eyes and was gone. But the river kept flowing. So the next time you feel small or lost or alone, remember the drop and the river it was never truly apart from. The boy stood barefoot in the dust. Beyond the village, where the rice paddies gave way to forest, he searched. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the bamboo groves. A wind stirred the leaves, but he did not move. His eyes scanned the ground for tracks, for broken twigs, for any sign of the ox. He had lost it, or perhaps he had never truly found it. And so began the journey, not of chasing, but of remembering. In Zen tradition, the ox herding pictures are a series of 10 images, each one a moment in the path toward awakening, not literal, not linear, but true in the way that poetry is true. They begin with a search. A boy looking for an ox. But the ox is not made of flesh. It is the self, the mind, the original nature. The Buddha within, hidden beneath thought, lost in distraction, masked by craving. And the boy, he is all of us. First, searching for the ox, the boy leaves the village. He's tired of ordinary life. He's heard rumors of peace, of awakening, of something real beneath the noise. So he begins to search. He reads sutras, he listens to teachers, he sits in meditation. But his mind is full of fog. Thoughts crowd his vision. Doubt clings like vines. Still, he continues, because something inside him knows there is more than this. 2. Seeing the traces. One morning, while gathering wood, he sees a bent stalk, then a hoof print in the mud. His heart jumps. Maybe I'm close. He kneels, follows the signs. In his practice, he notices moments of stillness. A breath that feels vast. A silence that doesn't feel empty. Just hints, traces, but enough to give him hope. 3. Catching sight of the ox. Suddenly, there it is. A glimpse through the trees. A flash of black hide. A tail flick. The boy freezes. Joy rises, and fear. Because now it's real. Not just a concept. Not just a goal. The ox exists, but it is wild. It does not come when called. and when the boy steps closer, it bolts. Fourth, catching the ox. He runs, he sweats, he stumbles. At last, he grabs the rope. The ox bucks, throws its weight against him. It drags him through the grass. But he holds tight. This is the phase of discipline, of hard practice, of struggling with the mind that wants to flee. It takes effort, structure, ritual. Again and again he pulls the ox back, until finally it yields. Not because it is broken, but because it begins to trust. 5. Taming the ox. Now he walks beside it, still holding the rope but not fighting. He brushes its coat, feeds it grain. They sit together beneath a tree. This is calm abiding. Meditation deepens. The mind, once unruly, now rests beside him like a friend. Joy rises, not from excitement, but from peace. 6. Riding the ox home. The boy climbs on its back. He plays the flute as they travel. There's laughter now. The ox no longer resists. They are one motion, one rhythm, the self and the selfless walking home together. Some think this is the end, but it is not. There is more, always more. 7. The ox transcended. One morning, he wakes, and the ox is gone. Not lost, gone. Dissolved. Because there was never a separate ox. Only the illusion of separation. There is no one taming another. No duality. Only being, only suchness. The boy sits in silence, and everything is enough. 8. Both ox and self forgotten. Now, not even the boy remains. No watcher, no watched. Just sky, wind, movement without mover, compassion without identity, peace without object. This is awakening. Not a peak to climb, but a dissolving of the climber. 9. Returning to the source. But even this is not the end. He returns to the world, to the place he left behind. The village, the noise, the errands. He no longer seeks to escape it. Because the sacred is here too. In the washing of bowls, in the crying of babies, in the marketplace and the broom. 10th. Entering the marketplace with open hands. He walks through the village. Dirty feet, laughing eyes, no halo, no robe. Just a man carrying firewood and smiling at children. He does not preach, does not speak of truth. He simply helps, lends a hand, bows to beggars, listens without interrupting, because he carries nothing and gives everything. Commentary. The ox herding. Pictures are not a ladder, they are a mirror. We move forward, then fall back, then forward again. Sometimes we glimpse the ox for a moment, then lose it for years. And that's okay, because the journey is not about getting somewhere. It's about seeing clearly where we are. The boy is not special. He is not a saint. He is you. Waking up slowly, letting go gently, returning home freely, and realizing it was never the ox that was missing, only the one who thought it was separate. There was a spider who spun her web in the rafters of the meditation hall. No one noticed her at first. She was small, thin-legged, her thread finer than the morning mist. But slowly as the days passed, her web grew, spanning beam to beam. A fragile bridge suspended in stillness. A young monk sweeping the floors one morning looked up. He paused. Something about the web held him. It glimmered faintly in the dawn light, each thread stretching toward another as if in quiet conversation. He brought his discovery to the abbot. "Should I remove it?" he asked. "It doesn't belong in the hall." The abbot looked up, tilted his head, smiled. "She belongs exactly where she is," he said, "and perhaps she's teaching more than we are." From that day forward, the monks left the web untouched. They meditated beneath it, bowed in its presence, watched as dew sometimes gathered along its strands, like pearls of stillness. One day, the young monk saw a tiny gnat caught in the web. He felt a pang of sorrow, moved closer, but before he could act, the spider emerged, wrapped the insect, and retreated. He asked the abbot again, "How can something so beautiful cause harm?" The abbot nodded slowly. "A web is not cruel," he said. "It is simply a truth." He continued, "Connection is not always comfort, but everything touches everything else." He gestured around the hall. "You see walls, mats, windows, candles, but they are not separate." He pointed up. "That spider reminds us. One thread trembles, and the whole web feels it." The monk began to notice more. How a sharp word at breakfast changed the tone of the morning. How a kind gesture rippled through the day. How his own thoughts, when tangled, echoed outward into others. One evening during Zazen, a gust of wind slipped through the shutters. The spider's web quivered, and every monk in the room turned slightly. Not toward the wind, but toward the movement of the web, as if they all felt it at once. There is a teaching in the Avatamsaka Sutra. In the realm of Indra's net, each jewel reflects all others. To touch one is to touch the whole. The spider did not preach. She simply spun, her work invisible until noticed, and then unforgettable. Months later, the web collapsed in a storm. Gone, no trace. But the young monk no longer looked for it above. He had begun to see the web everywhere. In the way the cook's ladle touched the soup pot. In the way the bell echoed down the hallway. In the way a smile from a stranger reached deep into his chest. Everything. Connected. Everything. Touching. Nothing. Alone. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. The forest welcomed him, but not with comfort. It offered no shade from questions, no warmth from familiarity. Siddhartha had left behind the silk and gold of palace life, and now walked among wandering seekers, mendicants, and sages whose ribs showed like cages, and whose eyes glimmered with discipline or delusion. He sought teachers, and they welcomed him, for his mind was sharp and his determination pure. He studied with Arada Kalama, who taught of the formless meditative realms, places where consciousness floated like light on still water. Siddhartha followed his teachings, and with silent breath and sharpened focus, he reached those planes. His mind became spacious. His thoughts slowed like clouds drifting across a still lake. For hours, even days, he remained in deep absorption, untouched by fear, untouched by want. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the truth. Though his body was still, suffering had not ended. The world remained the same, Hunger still visited the poor. Age still bent the backs of farmers. Death still came to children and kings alike. He bowed to Arada Kalama with gratitude and moved on. Next, he studied with Udaka Ramaputta, who taught of neither perception nor non-perception, of the vast nothingness that lay beyond all forms. Siddhartha once again followed, and again he reached the heights. He learned to let go of sensation, of even the thought of self. He floated, as if beyond the skin of the world. But again, when his eyes opened, the truth remained. Desire still lingered. Aging still came. Death still waited. He thanked his teachers, bowed with reverence, and walked on. He had reached the highest peaks of mind. He had sat in the palace of consciousness. And still, he had not seen freedom. In a grove beside the Niranjana river, he found a band of 5 ascetics who practiced fierce austerity. They believed that the body must be conquered by pain, that by starving it, punishing it, mastering its cravings, one could burn away desire and illusion. Siddhartha joined them. He ate but 1 grain of rice a day. He chewed each grain for long minutes until it dissolved like a breath. He slept in the open, through storm and frost, curled against the roots of trees, his robe no thicker than air. He held his breath until his vision blurred and his head rang with wind. His limbs withered. His skin clung to his bones like silk over stone. His hair fell in clumps, and birds perched near him, thinking him a branch. He listened only to silence. He welcomed pain. He thought it would purify him, but the fire of truth did not rise. He could silence the body. He could silence even the mind, but the ache remained. The ache that asked, why do we suffer? Why do we cling? What ends the endless turning of sorrow? One day, as he bathed in the river, he collapsed from weakness. The water barely reached his knees, yet his strength failed him. His vision dimmed, the world tilted. A young girl named Sujata saw him and, moved by compassion, offered him a bowl of rice milk. Her hands trembled as she knelt before him, unsure if he was a spirit or a dying man. The milk was warm, the grains soft. As it passed his lips, his body stirred, not with indulgence, but with remembrance. The body was not the enemy, nor was the world. In that moment, clarity dawned. This was not failure, this was insight. Neither indulgence in luxury, nor torment of the flesh had freed him. He had lived both extremes. He had walked both shores, and both had kept him bound. He would walk the middle way, not soft and yielding, nor rigid and cruel, not drowned in pleasure, nor crushed by pain, but steady, balanced, awake. He stood and walked back to the grove. The 5 ascetics saw the softness in his step, the colour in his cheeks, and they scorned him. He has abandoned the path, they whispered. He has turned back to comfort. But Siddhartha knew better. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply bowed and walked on. At the edge of the forest stood a great fig tree whose roots plunged deep and whose branches reached like arms toward the sky. Siddhartha looked upon it and knew, here he would sit, here he would wait. He gathered dry grass for a seat. He placed his back to the tree. He crossed his legs, rested his hands in his lap, and drew a deep, even breath. He made a vow. Though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I find the end of suffering. The sun passed, the moon rose, birds quieted, winds stilled, and in the silence the battle began, not with sword or shield, but with doubt and memory, fear and illusion. But that was the next story. For now he sat, still, the seeker who had tasted every path, now ready to look within. The next chapter had begun. It was the 5th night of the waxing moon. The air in Kapilavastu was still, not silent, but hushed, as though the stars had gathered at the edges of the world to listen. The palace walls breathed in jasmine and sandalwood. Lamps flickered gently, servants whispered down the halls. And in the royal chamber, Queen Maya of the Shakya clan slept. Her breath moved softly. Her hands rested over her womb, though she did not yet know why. Outside, the moon hung high, full, radiant, unblinking. And beneath that silver light, a dream came to her. Not wild, not fevered, but clear, like water holding the shape of the moon. The dream. She found herself in a quiet grove. It was not the palace, and yet it felt familiar. There were trees, tall and old. Their trunks curved like dancers, their leaves whispering secrets from lifetimes ago. She stood barefoot, wrapped in white. No crown, no jewels, only peace. And above her, the moon glowed brighter than it ever had, a luminous pearl suspended in sky. Then the winds parted, and from the east he came. A white elephant, vast and radiant, walked across the clouds, 6 tusks curved like ivory moons. Each footstep landed without sound, as though the earth bowed beneath him. His eyes were gentle, his ears like lotus petals. His skin shimmered, not with brilliance, but with quiet power. He carried a white lotus in his trunk, and he came to her, not with force, not with haste, but with the serenity of one who knows where he is going. She did not step back. She did not fear. She simply stood and watched. And when he reached her, he bowed, as if to offer the lotus, as if to ask permission. She lowered her gaze, and in that moment, the elephant entered her side. There was no pain, only light, only warmth, as though the moon had moved into her body, as though the entire sky now rested inside her. And in that light, she saw a vision, a child, radiant, seated on a lotus, surrounded by devas and sages, stepping not into royalty, but into destiny. She saw the turning of wheels, the shifting of ages, the crumbling of illusion, and then the dream dissolved. Waking, Maya woke before the birds. The sun had not yet touched the mountains. The oil lamp beside her flickered once, then settled. The chamber was silent, but her hands, still resting over her abdomen, were warm. And her heart beat not with confusion, but with awe. She rose slowly, wrapping herself in soft cloth. She moved through the halls like moonlight and summoned her attendants. "I have seen something," she said. "Call the king, call the sages, call the dream readers and wise ones, bring the astrologers." And they came, with scrolls, with incense, with knowing eyes. She recounted every detail. The forest, the moon, the elephant, the lotus, the peace. They listened, they nodded. And at last, the eldest among them, a man with a voice like woven silk, spoke. Your dream is not of the ordinary world. It is the sign of a great birth. The child in your womb is no ordinary prince. He will be a Chakravartin, a turner of the wheel. He will change the world. If he remains in the palace, he will become a king of kings. But if he sees the sorrows of the world, he will turn from gold to truth and become a Buddha. The king placed a hand upon her shoulder, not with doubt, but with wonder, because even he, strong, worldly, wise, felt something stirring, something vast, something that had no name yet. The months. As the days passed, the kingdom watched Queen Maya with quiet reverence. Wherever she walked, flowers bloomed slightly earlier. The air around her felt cooler, gentler. Children stopped crying as she passed. Strangers bowed, unsure why. She herself changed. She laughed more easily. She wept with the songs of birds. She dreamed of stars and rivers and ancient trees. She felt the child grow, not just within her body, but as if within the world itself. And one day, near the time of birth, she asked to travel to her ancestral home. It was the tradition of her people, but more than tradition, it was a quiet longing. The king arranged everything, silks and guards, chariots and attendants. But Maya moved simply. She chose only a few companions and rode through forests and open roads beneath a sky filled with soft clouds. The birth. They stopped at Lumbini, a grove of sal trees, green and peaceful. The sun filtered through the canopy. The wind carried the scent of blossoms. Birdsong drifted like prayer. Maya stepped down, drawn to the trees. She held a branch, looked upward, and in that moment, beneath the same moon she had seen in her dream, she gave birth. The child came easily, without struggle, without fear. He did not cry. He simply opened his eyes, wide and calm, and the legends say he took 7 steps, that lotus flowers bloomed beneath each foot, that he raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth and said, I am born for the benefit of all beings. The attendants wept. The forest fell silent, and the trees, it is said, bowed ever so slightly toward the child. Maya held him to her chest, and though she had seen him in vision, this was different. This was not dream. This was real. The warmth of skin, the weight of life, the beginning of something vast and quiet and beautiful. After, she did not live long after the birth. Some say it was destiny. That one who gives birth to a Buddha must return to the heavens. That her role was complete. Others say she became a guiding spirit, watching over him from a celestial realm, offering protection in moments when the path turned dark. But her presence never vanished. The child, Siddhartha, would one day walk away from his palace, would one day sit beneath a tree and awaken, would one day teach the world how to end suffering. But it began here, with a dream, with a white elephant, with a moonlit vow whispered across the veil of sleep, and with a mother who said yes, because every journey begins before we can name it. Every great awakening begins in the quiet, and sometimes the first step toward truth is a dream. The path was dry that day. Dust lifted from the earth like breath from grief. It clung to her ankles, soft and persistent. But Kisagotami did not notice. Her feet moved forward, bare and steady. Her arms, once empty with loss, now carried the truth. It had been some years since she had fallen at the feet of the Buddha, begging for medicine to save her dead child. Then, he had sent her through the city, asking for a mustard seed from a house untouched by death. At every door she knocked, and at every door sorrow had already sat before her. Now she understood, no house was free from loss. But this story begins not with her arrival, nor her wisdom, but with the silence before it. Kisagotami was once radiant with joy. She had married into wealth, borne a healthy son, and laughed easily beneath flowering trees. Her life was not lavish, but it was full. Her husband was kind. Her in-laws praised her for her quiet strength and good nature. And her child was the axis of her world. His laugh echoed through the garden, a sound so bright it seemed to ripple the petals of the lotus pond. But when sickness came, it moved like fire in dry grass. First, a fever, then the cough, then the silence. Her husband wept, her in-laws prayed. Neighbors brought herbs, ointments, and whispered remedies passed down through generations. But nothing stilled the trembling of the boy's limbs. Nothing cooled his burning skin. And then, one still morning, as dew clung to the leaves and the world turned quietly onward, he stopped breathing. Something in Kisagotami's mind refused the truth. It broke, not like glass, but like a door slammed shut against a storm. She did not bury him. She could not. Instead, she wrapped his small body in linen and cradled him close, as she always had. She walked barefoot through the streets, her face blank with disbelief, her voice hollow with pleading. "He is only sleeping," she whispered to merchants. "There must be something, some medicine, some root. Please help me wake him." People pitied her. Some turned away, ashamed. Others wept at the sight but dared not speak. A few offered dried herbs or quiet prayers, not to cure, but to comfort. But none could give her what she asked for. Then one old man, gentle and weathered like the bark of the Bodhi tree, placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Go to the Buddha. He sees clearly. Perhaps he will know what to do." So she did. Through dust and heat, she walked to the monastery, her arms still wrapped around the stillness of her child. Her eyes, dry now, saw only hope. When she reached him, the Buddha met her gaze with unwavering calm. He did not flinch at the bundle in her arms. He did not speak quickly or softly or with sorrow. He simply said, "Bring me a mustard seed from a home where death has not visited. Then I will help." Kisagotami bowed deeply, grateful beyond words, and ran. House after house, door after door. She knocked. She asked. She waited. At the first door, a woman with kind eyes shook her head. "My brother died last winter," she said. "I'm sorry." At the next, a man held his son in his arms and said, "If only. We lost his mother at childbirth." At another, a young girl barely older than her own son opened the door, tears still fresh on her cheeks. "Grandfather passed last night," she whispered. Each story struck her not like a blow, but like a chisel, slowly carving away at her illusion. With every encounter, her burden changed. The weight of the child in her arms remained the same, but the grief within her no longer stood alone. It became something shared. A river of sorrow running through many homes, not just hers. And in that shared space, she found the first breath of peace. She returned. She did not knock this time. She did not beg. She simply walked to the Buddha and placed the body of her son before him. Then quietly she said, "I see now. There is no house without sorrow." The Buddha nodded, and without ceremony, without demand, he welcomed her into the Sangha. She shaved her head, took on the robes, learned to breathe again, learned to walk not to escape grief, but to carry it with grace. The seasons passed like silk through her fingers. She became a teacher, not of words, but of presence. Her voice was never the loudest, nor her gestures the grandest, but when she sat beside those in pain, their breathing slowed, their trembling eased. She was the stillness they had forgotten could exist. One morning, as the sun rose pale over the bamboo grove, a young woman arrived at the monastery. Her face was drawn with confusion. Her hands trembled with exhaustion. Her eyes were red, but not yet emptied of tears. She had lost her father. Suddenly, cruelly. Though she had performed all the rites, burned all the offerings, sat in silence beside her mother, something inside her chest would not still. "I do not know what to do with this ache," she said. She asked for Kisa Gotami. The nun sat beside her beneath a neem tree. Birds moved through the leaves above them, and the distant sound of sweeping could be heard from the monastery steps. Kisa did not rush. She listened, let silence breathe between them. Then she placed a small, smooth pebble in the girl's palm. "Carry this," she said, "for 3 days. But each day, speak to one person about someone they have lost. Ask for their story. Then return." The girl did as told. And on the 3rd morning, she returned, eyes swollen, chest raw, but breath moving freely. She knelt at Kisa's feet and wept, but the tears came with space, with rhythm, with healing. "I thought I was alone," she said. Kisa Gotami nodded. "Grief is a shadow," she said. "It grows darker when we sit beneath it alone. But when we share it, it moves, it thins, it teaches." The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "What did it teach you?" Kisa looked to the far hills, where the morning light softened the edges of the earth. "That the heart does not break from love," she said, "but from the illusion that love can be possessed. My child was not mine. He was a gift. So were the mornings we shared, the soft sound of his feet, the questions he asked at twilight. His death was not punishment. It was part of the changing tide. We do not own the ocean, but we can learn to swim." The girl placed her hand over her heart. "Will this ache ever leave?" "No," Kisa said gently, "but it will grow roots, and from those roots something will bloom. You will never be the same, but you may become more." The girl bowed low, forehead touching earth, and so another seed was planted, not of mustard, but of compassion. Kisa Gotami came to be known not for her loss, but for her light, for the way she listened without rushing, spoke without preaching, held without clutching. She walked through villages not to convert, but to sit, to be, to remind those in pain that no house stands outside sorrow, and no heart must bear it alone. Thus, the lesson of the mustard seed lived on, not in the search, but in the returning, not in the seed itself, but in the soil of shared humanity it revealed. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. Long ago, in a kingdom ringed by mountains and temples, a mighty king ruled from a palace of stone and gold. He was feared by his enemies, praised by poets, and followed by thousands. His armies stretched across the land. His wealth filled entire chambers, and his commands echoed through cities like thunder. But still, he was restless. Victory brought no peace. Praise faded quickly. Even sleep, wrapped in silk and guarded by soldiers, felt hollow. And so one morning, while gazing out across his kingdom from a marble balcony, the king spoke aloud. "Who in this world is greater than I?" A servant, sweeping quietly nearby, paused. "There is one," he said softly, eyes downcast. The king turned sharply. "Who?" "A sage," said the servant. "He lives alone in the forest, wears no crown, owns no gold. But they say he holds more peace in his silence than all your generals in battle." The king laughed. "A beggar in the woods, greater than me." But something in the servant's voice lingered. And later that night, when the court had gone quiet, the king summoned his best horse and rode out alone, disguised in simple robes, his face shadowed by the hood of a traveler. He rode for 2 days, through thick jungle, across rivers, past farmers and monks and children who did not bow. Finally, at the edge of a still grove, he saw a small hut beneath a Bodhi tree, and outside it, seated cross-legged on a flat stone, was the sage. No guards, no roof over his head, no possessions, just stillness, and eyes that did not flicker when the king approached. "You are the one they speak of?" the king asked. The sage nodded once. "I am one, of many." The king studied him. "You have no palace, no army, no throne, and yet people speak your name in reverence. Why?" The sage said nothing. The silence stretched, long enough for the king to feel his own voice echo. Finally, the sage opened his palm and motioned for the king to sit. The king hesitated, then obeyed. They sat together under the tree, as the wind moved gently through the leaves. No words, no commands, just presence. After a long while, the king said, "You are not afraid of me." "I see no king," said the sage, "only a man with questions." The king frowned. "I have conquered lands, broken enemies, shaped history. You think I have questions?" The sage met his eyes. "Then why are you here?" The king opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. Because beneath the silk, beneath the crowns, beneath the noise, he had come not to test the sage, but to understand something he could not command. Finally, he asked, "Why do people follow you?" "I do not ask them to." "Then why do they listen?" The sage picked up a small stone from the earth, rolled it in his fingers. "They listen," he said, "because I have no need for them to." The king blinked. "I lead armies, command cities, hold power over life and death, but still I'm not content." The sage nodded. "Because you mistake fear for respect, obedience for love, wealth for worth." The king stiffened. "Are you saying I am not powerful?" "I am saying," the sage said gently, "that true power does not cling, it does not shout, it does not fear being forgotten." They sat again in silence. The wind stirred the sage's robe. The king looked down at his hands. "I have everything," he said, "but still I feel empty." The sage smiled. "Then you are ready." "Ready for what?" "To lead without needing to be above." That evening, the king returned to his palace. No fanfare, no declaration, but something had changed. He began to listen more, to speak less, to ask questions instead of giving orders. His advisors whispered about his visits to temples, his long walks alone, his sudden interest in sitting beneath trees without speaking. And when his generals asked, "Who taught you this?" he said simply, "A man with nothing, who showed me everything." Years later, when the sage passed into silence beneath the same Bodhi tree, the king declared a day of stillness across the land. No work, no speech, just listening. And in time, his own rule became a story of its own, not because he expanded borders, but because he stopped needing to, not because he gained more, but because he learned to let go. And the story of the king and the sage spread like the breeze that once moved through the forest leaves. A reminder that the crown is not the source of power, wisdom is. And the one who does not seek to rule is often the one most worthy to lead. A monk once travelled alone through a deep forest. He'd been walking for days, through mud, through heat, through cold rain. He carried nothing but a worn robe, a begging bowl, and a satchel with a single stone inside. Why the stone? He could not say, only that a teacher once gave it to him and said, "Carry this until you understand its weight." The monk took it literally, and dutifully he carried the stone. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the months passed, over hills, across rivers, through deserts, it began to burden him. His back ached, his hands calloused, his mind grew resentful. "Why must I carry this?" he muttered one evening, dropping beside a creek. He looked at the stone, round, dark, unremarkable. A simple weight, and yet it had become everything. That night, he slept beneath the stars, and he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in an endless field beneath a vast open sky. He held the stone tightly, afraid to drop it, afraid he might lose something important. Then a voice, calm and distant, whispered, "Are you carrying the stone, or is the stone carrying you?" He awoke just before dawn, heart racing. The sky above him was pale and soft, wide and light. He looked at the stone again and understood. This is the story of thoughts, identity, and the illusion of burdens, how what we cling to becomes our weight. Commentary. Many of us carry stones, regret, shame, an old story someone once told us about who we are, a wound we've wrapped ourselves around for so long it feels like identity. We think we're being strong, but strength is not clinging. It's knowing when to let go. The monk carried the stone because he trusted his teacher. But trust without inquiry is like walking in darkness without asking if there's a door. His real practice began not when he received the stone, but when he questioned it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, even to things that seem noble: tradition, memory, belief, self-image. We say, "This is who I am." But who is saying it? And what happens when the self no longer fits? The stone was not the problem. The gripping was. The fear of what it meant to be without it. We carry pain from the past because we think dropping it means forgetting. We carry roles that no longer serve us because we think they are us. We carry anger because we think it protects us. But a clenched fist cannot hold the sky. Later that day, the monk stood on a hilltop and watched the clouds pass. He held the stone in both hands, not angrily, not resentfully, just with awareness, and then he set it gently on the ground, not thrown, not discarded, just returned. A breeze touched his robe. The clouds shifted. He took his next step, and it felt like the first. In that moment, he realized the sky had always been there, unbothered, unburdened, vast, and that somewhere along the way, he had confused being grounded with being weighed down. This is the nature of the mind. It can be like a stone, heavy, fixated, stuck in the past, or like the sky, open, vast, always able to hold the weather without becoming it. The monk never told others to drop their stones. He simply told this story and ended it with a question. What are you carrying that is carrying you? So, pause today. Look gently at the weight in your hands, your heart, your mind, and ask yourself, do I still need this to walk? Or have I mistaken the stone for my path? There was once a man who lived in poverty. His shoes were worn, his coat threadbare, his belly often empty, and his hands always calloused. But he had a friend, kind and wealthy, who loved him deeply. One day this friend came to visit. They shared a meal, laughed like children, and drank until the poor man fell asleep in contentment. Before leaving, the friend saw how hard the man's life had become. So he quietly took a jewel, a priceless, radiant stone, and stitched it inside the lining of the man's robe. He said nothing. He simply left the gift where it could not be lost. Years passed. The poor man wandered, worked, begged, slept beneath bridges and woke in alleyways. He remained convinced he had nothing, never knowing that a treasure was sewn into his own clothing. He suffered, all while wealth brushed against his ribs, all while forgetting what he already carried. Then one day the two friends met again, and when the rich man saw the state of his companion, he cried out, "Why have you lived this way? Don't you remember? I gave you everything. The jewel has been with you this whole time." The poor man froze. His hands trembled as he turned the robe inside out. And there, nestled in the seam, untouched and waiting, was the jewel. This is a parable from the Lotus Sutra, and it is not about wealth, it is about Buddha nature. It is about the truth we already carry, but forget. The man is all of us, wandering, doubting, working endlessly to find meaning, purpose, belonging, thinking we must earn it, thinking we must seek it, never realizing we were born with the jewel. We never lacked it. We only forgot to look. Buddha nature is not something to gain. It is not granted to the worthy. It is already here, in the one who chants, in the one who steals, in the one who weeps in shame, in the one who laughs too loudly in the back of the zendo. The jewel shines equally. It does not discriminate. In Mahayana Buddhism, this parable is a teaching of Tathagatagarbha, the womb of Buddhahood. It means that all beings, no matter how lost, carry the seed of awakening, not as potential, but as reality. Already whole, already luminous, already stitched into the lining of our very being. The problem is not that we are broken. The problem is that we believe we are broken. And so we search, outside, in teachers, in techniques, in titles, in temporary comforts, all while the jewel sits quietly inside, waiting. There's a saying in Zen, don't seek the truth, only stop cherishing opinions. Because the more we chase, the farther we run from what is already still. In the story, the friend does not blame. He simply says, look. That is the role of the teacher, not to give you the jewel, but to remind you it's there, to show you the thread, to help you turn your robe inside out. Even your flaws are not flaws. They are fabric. Even your pain is not proof of lack. It is the tension in the thread that protects the jewel. Even your delusion is a path, if you let it lead you inward. The poor man's mistake wasn't laziness. It was forgetting his inheritance, just like us. We forget we are enough. We forget we are worthy. We forget that what we seek has always been with us. Buddhism is not about becoming holy. It is about remembering who you are, who you've always been, what cannot be taken from you, not by grief, not by failure, not by your own darkest thoughts. Sometimes people ask, but if I already have Buddha nature, why practice? And the answer is simple: to remember, to loosen the thread, to notice the glimmer, to stop walking past yourself like a stranger. Commentary: the jewel is not hard to find, but it is easy to overlook, because it does not shout, it does not sparkle in the usual light. It sits in the quietest part of you and waits for you to be still enough to feel it. You may not believe this yet. That's okay. Belief is not required. Only curiosity, only the courage to look inside the robe and ask, what if I am already whole? In a monastery garden, a novice once asked the teacher, where can I find the Buddha? The teacher pointed to the ground. Toes. Then to the novice's chest, heart. Then to the novice's eyes. Everywhere you see, but especially where you never thought to look. You have the jewel. So now, stop asking how to earn it. Start asking how to honor it. Live from it. Speak from it. Let it shape your steps. And when others forget their own jewels, remind them gently, just like the friend did. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. High in the hills above a quiet town, there stood a temple. Its walls were weathered by wind and time, its steps worn smooth by generations of sandals, its prayer flags faded but still fluttering, and in its tallest tower hung a bell. Massive, bronze, perfectly cast. It had been gifted by a distant king centuries ago, carried up the mountain by oxen and monks, polished each year, respected, admired, but never rung, not once. The bell had a name, Resonance of the Mountain. Inscribed around its rim were words in a forgotten tongue. It was said to hold the most beautiful sound ever forged, so pure, so deep, that it would quiet all suffering for a moment. But no one had ever heard it, because the abbot long ago had made a vow: let the bell only ring when the world is ready to listen. And so it waited and waited. Pilgrims climbed the hill just to see it. Children dared each other to touch the rope, but none pulled. It became a symbol of restraint, of mystery, of potential, and eventually of silence too deep to question. One day, a novice asked the elder monk, "Why don't we ring it?" The monk shrugged, because it was meant to be rung, but never was. The novice frowned. Then what's the point of its sound? The monk looked out at the horizon and replied, "You tell me." The story of the bell spread like smoke, and in time, people began to wonder how many other bells go unrung, not made of bronze, but of possibility. There was a painter who never showed her art, a musician who kept every song in his notebook, a teacher who knew how to heal but doubted her voice, a young man who wrote letters he never sent, a woman who forgave but never said the words aloud. Each of them had a bell, hanging in the tower of their own life, polished, admired, imagined, but never heard. This is the parable of unused potential. The Dharma teaches us about impermanence, yes, but also about urgency, not frantic urgency, but gentle, clear truth. This life will not wait forever, and the sound in you deserves to be shared. The bell was never rung, not because it couldn't be, but because someone was waiting for perfect conditions, for absolute certainty, for a sign. But life rarely gives signs, only moments, and you must choose to meet them. There is a Zen story of a man who stands beside a river. He thirsts, but waits for the perfect reflection to appear on the surface before drinking. He dies with water at his feet. What sound do you carry within you? What truth, what offering, what kindness left unsaid, what creation unwritten, what forgiveness unopened? Letting your bell ring does not require a crowd. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true and shared. One evening, a new abbot arrived at the temple. She had studied the bell's history, had bowed to it many times. And then, one spring morning, as the valley bloomed, she climbed the tower and pulled the rope. The sound that followed was not loud, not shocking, but profound. It rolled through the mountains like a low tide, clear, mournful, joyful, full. Birds rose into the air. Monks paused mid-step. Villagers lifted their heads from bowls and windows. And in that moment, everything was still. Not because they heard something new, but because they heard something they had always carried inside. Then the bell was silent again. But something had changed. The abbot later said, "A bell is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to be heard. And so are we." Commentary. This parable asks a quiet but urgent question. What are you holding back? Not out of wisdom, but out of fear. The sound in you may not end suffering. It may not change the world, but it may change a moment. It may reach one person. It may free your own breath, and that is enough. We often wait for permission, for clarity, for mastery, for the right time. But the bell does not ask, "Will I be understood?" It asks, "Will I be true?" The world is filled with unwritten books, unsung songs, unspoken love, unrung bells, and it is not failure to stay silent, but it is loss of what could have been shared, loss of what someone else needed to hear, even if only once. You don't have to shout. You don't have to perform. You just have to let your voice exist, to let the truth you carry move from silence into air. So ring your bell, tell your story, share your art, speak your heart, forgive, laugh, cry, begin again, even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if no one claps. Let the sound live outside of you. Let it ripple. Let it go. Because a silent bell may be beautiful, but only a ringing bell is alive. A small boat drifted across the open sea. The waves rocked it gently. Clouds moved slowly above. Seabirds called from afar, but there was no land in sight. In the boat sat a lone traveller, bowl in lap, robes soft with salt air. He watched the sky reflect on the water and whispered the phrase he'd heard 100 times but never understood. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These words come from the Heart Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism. They are short, sharp, mysterious. They have been chanted in temples for centuries, painted on scrolls, whispered by monks, recited by dying lips. But what do they mean? How can something be both form and emptiness? Is it a riddle, a paradox, or a doorway? The traveller had once believed emptiness meant nothingness, that it was cold, silent, void. He tried to detach, to erase, to disappear. But the more he tried, the heavier he felt, because he still existed, still felt grief, still saw suffering in others and in himself. So he came to the ocean, not to escape, but to sit inside the question. The waves rose, fell. He dipped his fingers in the water. It clung for a moment, then slipped away. Form, emptiness, a wave, is not separate from the sea. It rises, appears, shines in the light, then dissolves. But it was never apart. It never existed in the way we imagine. It was always just movement, a form born from formlessness, a shape that could never be held. This is the meaning of emptiness. Shunyata in Sanskrit. It does not mean nothing. It means no fixed, independent existence, no solid boundary between self and world. Everything is interbeing, dependent, arising together. Your body is form, but where does it begin? At the skin. What about the breath entering your lungs? What about the warmth from the sun on your cheek? What about the smile passed to you by a stranger? Where do you end and the world begin? The more you look, the more it all dissolves into ocean. Form is emptiness. Everything you see is temporary, transient, unstable. But then, the second line, emptiness is form. This is the beauty. Emptiness is not barren. It appears as everything. The flower, the teacup, the child's laugh, the pain in your chest. All are expressions of emptiness, not meaningless but miraculous, because they are here. Briefly, shining like dew before it falls. The traveller looked around the boat. Wood planks, salt crust, a loose nail near the bow, all temporary, all destined to decay. And yet, each part of the boat held him above the water. Emptiness had taken form, and that form mattered. It kept him afloat. There is a story from a monastery. A student asked the master, "If all is emptiness, why do we sweep the floor?" The master said, "Because the dust is also empty." Then handed him the broom. Emptiness does not deny suffering. It does not say your pain is an illusion. It says this pain is real, but not permanent. It arises and passes, like a wave, like a thought, like every tear that ever fell. Emptiness does not diminish life. It makes life possible. When you understand this, not just with mind, but with breath, you begin to live differently. You don't grasp as tightly. You don't fear change quite so much. You begin to see others not as objects, but as fleeting, radiant moments, not mine, not enemy, just waves, each one precious. The traveller reached into the ocean and lifted a handful of water. It shimmered, slipped through his fingers, gone. But the sea remained, and he smiled. Commentary. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt, to be returned to again and again, like a bell that rings across the years. Each time you hear it, you understand a little more. You are not a solid thing. You are movement, memory, dust and starlight. You are shaped by your parents, your fears, your laughter, your kindness. You are not fixed, but you are real, not because you are permanent, but because you are here. Now, the boat on the ocean is your life. It will not last, but while it floats, it can carry you. It can carry others. It can move with the waves, not fight them. And when it sinks, because all boats do, the sea will still be there. And you will return to it, not lost, but home. There was once a tree that stood just beyond the monastery walls, a tall maple. Its leaves flamed gold each autumn, spilling light into the courtyard like scattered coins. Monks often paused beneath it, bowing to its stillness, especially when the season turned. One afternoon in early autumn, a young novice sat beneath the tree troubled. His master had given him a koan to meditate on. What do you cling to that no longer lives? He had meditated, chanted, even fasted, but the answer would not come. That day, the wind had begun its long conversation with the branches. A single leaf, amber at the edges, twirled down, landed softly in the novice's lap. He stared at it. Fragile, veined, no longer green, still beautiful, but no longer living. The tree gave no sign of loss. No grief, no clinging, only release. Another leaf drifted down, then another. The novice looked up. The tree was letting go of what had once been its crowning glory. Not with sorrow, but with grace. Later, he spoke with his master. Why does the tree drop what once gave it life? The master replied, because it trusts the cycle. It knows spring will come again. It makes room by releasing. The novice thought of the things he had held too tightly, a grudge from a harsh word, a dream that had withered, an idea of who he should become. He returned to the tree the next day, sat beneath it again. This time, when a leaf fell into his hand, he whispered, "Thank you," and let it go. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Letting go is not loss, it is returning." As the days grew colder, the tree became bare. Some monks said it looked lonely, exposed, but the novice saw strength in that nakedness, a kind of quiet surrender. It was not clinging to what had passed. It was preparing for what would come. Winter arrived. Snow dusted the monastery roofs. The tree stood still, unmoving, uncovered, unconcerned. Months passed, and then, one morning in spring, the novice awoke to find tiny buds on the tree's limbs, software green, new. He smiled and understood at last. What we release returns, but only when we've stopped grasping. There is a phrase in Buddhist teaching, you can't receive with a closed hand. The tree had shown this truth. Letting go is not the end. It is the opening. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. It started like any other Monday. The inbox blinked with urgency. 142 unread. A blinking red light on the office phone. Calendar blocks stacked like bricks. Slack notifications multiplying like rabbits in spring. Julian sipped lukewarm coffee and took a deep breath. Then he dove in. He was efficient, smart, reliable, they called him. Always responsive. Always ready. Always tired. Somewhere between the 7th reply and the 4th Zoom call, he noticed his chest tightening. Nothing sharp, just a quiet constriction. A warning, like a traffic light blinking yellow. But he kept going, because the world rewarded output. And silence. Silence didn't show up on KP is. By 4 p.m., his eyes burned. By 6 p.m., he was still typing. He didn't hear the rain start, didn't notice the tea growing cold beside his keyboard, until a calendar reminder popped up. Meditation class, 6:30 p.m., room 4B. He had signed up weeks ago, half joking, a resolution maybe. He almost closed the tab, but something, maybe the silence behind the noise, nudged him. Room 4B was warm, soft lighting, folded cushions, a bell. Only 6 people sat in the circle. A woman at the front, maybe late 40s, calm-eyed, greeted him with a nod, not words. "Sit however you like," she said. Julian sat stiffly, still in his button-up, still full of digital momentum. The teacher closed her eyes, spoke gently. "Let the inbox go. Let the to-do list drop its grip. Notice the breath, that's all." Julian's mind raced. The Henderson file, the Q4 budget, the message he forgot to reply to. But the bell rang again, soft and clear, like a sound not trying to impress anyone. And slowly, his thoughts became less sticky. After 20 minutes, she said, "Busy is not always bad, but sometimes It's a way of avoiding stillness. Ask yourself, what would I hear if I stopped pretending I didn't have time to listen? Julian felt something twist. Not painfully, just honestly, because beneath the notifications and meetings and perfectly managed chaos was a quiet voice he hadn't heard in years. It didn't ask for much, just a pause, a breath, a life lived on purpose, not just performed. That night, he walked home in the rain. No umbrella, no rush. Each raindrop felt like punctuation in a sentence he had forgotten how to read. The next morning, his inbox was just as full, but he didn't open it right away. He brewed tea, sat for 5 minutes, watched the steam rise and disappear. And in those 5 minutes, he remembered he was alive, not just employed. Julian didn't quit his job, didn't move to the mountains. He still answered emails, still ran meetings. But once a day, he closed the laptop, turned off the noise, and let the silence speak. The Buddha never warned about email, but he did say, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes peace is not found in responding faster. It's found in not responding at all, at least for a moment. In the 17th century, Japan was changing. Temples were quiet. Monks walked with their hands folded inside sleeves, heads bowed against the cold wind of politics, poverty, and war. But in Kyoto, a monk named Tetsugen Doko had a dream: to bring the sutras, the sacred texts of the Buddha, to the people. Not locked away in elite monasteries, not spoken only in the high Chinese script of scholars, but printed, in Japanese, on paper, so the common farmer, the weaver, the rice merchant, and the child sweeping the temple steps could read the Buddha's words. He would print them, all of them, in woodblock form, an enormous undertaking. Tetsugen began with nothing. No paper, no ink, no press, no woodblocks, just a robe, a bowl, and a vow. So he travelled the countryside, bowl in hand, asking for donations, not for himself, but for the words of the Dharma. At first, people were skeptical. A monk with no monastery, a printing press as a spiritual act. But Tetsugen spoke with quiet conviction. He did not pressure. He did not persuade. He simply bowed and spoke of a dream where truth could be read by all. And slowly, the donations came. Coins, rice, a silver hairpin from a widow, a child's carved flute. One woman brought a single perfect sheet of handmade paper and said, "I cannot read, but may this help someone who can." Years passed. Tetsugen travelled through mountain towns and port cities. He walked in sun, in snow, in silence. The money piled up, not in bags, but in faith, until finally, he had enough. Enough for paper, ink, carvers, labour. The work could begin, but then disaster struck. The Uji River flooded. A great famine swept across the land. Families went hungry. Children cried into bowls of water. And Tetsugen looked at the money he had gathered. He did not hesitate. He gave every coin to relief. Food was bought, homes were rebuilt, the suffering eased, and the printing dream disappeared for a time. When the crisis passed, Tetsugen began again. From zero, bowl in hand, dust on his feet. the same quiet voice, the same calm vow. This time, people gave more quickly. They remembered, they trusted. He gathered enough once more. The press was readied, woodblocks carved. Then, epidemic. A plague swept through Kyoto. The poor collapsed in alleys. Temples turned into infirmaries. And once again, Tetsugen gave all the money away. The third time, he began again. Older now, slower, but steady. His vow never cracked, and after many years, the sutras were finally printed in 7,000 woodblocks, hand-carved and inked with devotion. The first complete Japanese printing of the Buddhist canon. Even today, the blocks are preserved at Obaku Monastery in Kyoto, a monument to patience, to persistence, to presence. But ask a Zen master about Tetsugen's sutras, and they will smile and say, yes, he printed 3 editions, but the first 2 are the most beautiful. Commentary. Zen is not impressed by grand gestures, it is moved by quiet truth. Tetsugen's vow was not to ink, not to paper, but to service. And so, when suffering appeared, he did not cling to his dream. He let it go, not out of failure, but out of deeper practice. The first 2 editions were never printed, but they were lived. Printed in rice, in shelter, in the body of a starving child who lived because of his decision. Printed in the woman who kept her husband another year because Tetsugen paid for medicine instead of woodblocks. Printed in the hearts of strangers who saw that the Dharma is not words, but action. The third edition, that was just the form. The content had already been carved in compassion. Tetsugen teaches us, your vow is not what you say when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you. And in those moments, when your deepest aspiration must bend to the needs of others, that is the real test of the way. We all have sutras we want to print, projects, dreams, a book, a vision, a calling. And often, the world interrupts, crisis, illness, family, but Zen does not see this as failure. It sees it as opportunity to offer, to release, to serve something greater than the plan. And when the time is right, you return, you begin again. Because nothing is lost. Each pause is part of the rhythm. Each surrender shapes the heart. Each detour deepens the vow. There is no need to rush. If the heart remains clear, even a delay becomes Dharma. Even an interruption becomes a verse. Even a famine becomes a teaching. Tetsugen walked the mountains for decades, but the greatest thing he carried was patience, a faith that giving is not giving up, and that sometimes the invisible sutras are the ones that save us most. The baby arrived in the middle of the night. Wrapped in a tattered blanket, cheeks flushed with cold, it was placed on the doorstep of the small mountain temple. When the monk opened the door, he found only the child and a young couple trembling in the shadows. The girl clutched her shawl. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "This child is yours," she said. "You are the father." The monk, Hakuin Ekaku, did not argue. He did not protest. He did not explain. He only looked at the baby, then at the girl, and said softly, "Is that so?" In town, the scandal bloomed like wildfire. Hakuin, the respected monk, the teacher, the silent one, had seduced a local girl. People spat at the ground when they passed him. Merchants whispered behind their hands. Disciples left the temple in shame. Still, Hakuin said nothing. He carried water. He chopped wood. He fed the child with one hand and stirred rice with the other. Winter passed, then spring. The baby grew, laughed, cried, teethed on the corner of Hakuin's robe. And still, the townspeople looked on with judgment. And still Hakuin said nothing. Only that same phrase when asked, "Is that so?" A year passed. The girl returned, eyes lowered, voice trembling. She fell to her knees before Hakuin. "I lied," she said. "It was not you. I was afraid. I blamed you." The crowd had gathered now. Some gasped, some hung their heads. She wept and reached for the child. "I'm sorry. I came to take him home." And Hakuin? He held out the child gently and said, "Is that so?" This is one of the most beloved stories in Zen, not for its drama, but for its stillness, for the way Hakuin held the center, unmoved by praise or blame. He did not fight the accusation. He did not defend his name. He did not collapse under judgment. He simply met life as it came. In the West, we are taught to guard our reputations, to clarify, to prove, to explain. But Zen sees the self as a construct, a house of cards built from opinions, images, and roles. And so, Hakuin let his fall, willingly, without resistance. To many, this seems weak, unwise. But in truth, it takes immense strength to say, "Let them think what they will, I remain." Not in apathy, but in presence. Because the ego is loud, but truth is quiet. Hakuin's phrase, "Is that so?" is not sarcasm. It is not indifference. It is a bow to the unpredictability of life, to its mess, its reversals, its harshness and grace. It is the refusal to cling to any label, hero or villain, saint or sinner, right or wrong. There's a famous Zen saying, "Praise and blame are like the wind. To follow them is to be tossed about like a leaf. To stand firm is to become a tree." Hakuin was a tree, rooted, silent, alive. In private moments he may have wept. He may have watched the baby sleep and wondered why the world twists so easily. But his practice was clear. Do not grasp, do not reject, receive each moment, and respond not with reactivity, but with integrity. What would you do if someone lied about you? If the world turned against you? If your name became a weapon? Could you breathe? Could you hold the pain without making it your identity? Could you say, "Is that so?" and keep walking? There's another layer to this story. By taking the child in, Hakuin protected the girl. He absorbed her shame, held her fear, became her shield. Not out of guilt, but out of compassion. And when the truth came, he did not demand apology. He did not say, "I told you so." He returned the child like a leaf to the wind. Because Zen asks nothing of others, only this: be fully present and let go. Commentary. In the modern world, everyone is watching, commenting, interpreting, and we're trained to manage perception, to curate our story. But Hakuin reminds us, your life is not what others say. It is what you do when no one understands you. when you're misread, blamed, dismissed. That is where your practice begins. Hakuin did not defend his innocence, because truth does not need defense. It needs stillness. It needs the refusal to flinch. When asked later why he took the child in, Hakuin said, "Because the child needed care, and the girl needed mercy, and the temple needed the Dharma to be lived." No scripture, no debate, just rice, sleep, warmth, and the ability to say yes to life, even when it doesn't make sense. Is that so? Is not an answer. It's an opening, a breath before reacting. A choice to not fight the river, but to float, eyes open, and maybe even smile. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. There was once a garden behind a monastery. Not grand, not famous, just a quiet patch of earth behind the northern wall. Monks took turns tending it, pulling weeds, watering rows of vegetables, scattering herbs for bees. But there was one monk, young and full of questions, who never understood the point. His name was Anyo. He had come to the monastery seeking answers about karma, rebirth, and enlightenment, and all he seemed to be doing was weeding cabbages. One morning, he sat in the dirt beside the old gardener, Master Banzan, and asked, "Why am I here? I came to learn the truth of existence, not harvest radishes." Banzan didn't look up. He plucked a small stone from the soil and said, "Tell me, Anyo, do you know what kind of seed this is?" Anyo shook his head. Banzan smiled. "Neither do I, but we'll find out in time." Later that week, the master handed Anyo a pouch of seeds. "Plant these," he said, "just one each day." So Anyo did. One on Monday, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday. By the second week, he asked, "What are they?" Banzan only replied, "Keep planting." Weeks passed. Shoots emerged. Some were thin and green, some strong and red-veined, some curled into spirals, others drooped under their own weight. Anyo began to notice which plants needed more water, which thrived in shade, which invited birds. He stopped asking what they were and started tending them for what they needed. By midsummer, the garden had transformed, not because of what Anyo had planted, but because of how he had planted. This is the story of karma as intention, how what we plant becomes our world. Commentary. We often think of karma as a great book in the sky, that someone somewhere is keeping score. But karma is not accounting, it's gardening. Every thought, word, and action is a seed. Some bloom quickly, some take years, some seem to disappear, only to sprout when the rains return. Anyo wanted to learn about karma, but he expected a scroll, a sermon, or a secret. Instead, he got a pouch of seeds. Because karma isn't something you learn, it's something you live. You discover it with every gesture, every tone in your voice, every time you choose to act with care or without it. Some people say, "But I didn't mean to hurt anyone." But even unintentional seeds grow. A sharp word, a careless gesture, a forgotten promise. Each one goes into the soil of the world. But so do quiet kindnesses. A bowl of warm rice, A door held open, a moment of patience with someone slower than you. These bloom too, even when you never see them again. Banzan once said to Anyo, "Don't ask what the seed will become. Ask what the soil needs today." That is the heart of intention. Not just what you do, but why. Karma begins not with action, but with intention. Even the Buddha said, "It is volition, monks, that I call karma. For having willed, one acts by body, speech, and mind." Years later, Anyo became a teacher. He no longer spoke of karma as fate. He taught his students how to garden their lives, how to pause before speaking, how to breathe before judging, how to water what they wish to grow, inside themselves and others. One student once asked him, "What is the best seed to plant?" Anyo smiled and said, "Attention to this moment and how you meet it." So the next time you move through your day, ask yourself, what am I planting and where? Because every moment is soil. And your attention is the seed. He was the oldest monk in the monastery. No one quite remembered when he had arrived. He had been there before the abbot, before the bell tower was built, before the bamboo grove behind the kitchen had taken root. They called him Elder Wen. His robe was patched at the sleeves, his back curved like a bowed reed, and his eyes were always smiling, like he had seen something long ago and never forgotten it. He didn't teach, not formally, but every morning he lit the incense before dawn. Every afternoon he watered the moss around the garden stones, and in the evening he swept the meditation hall in silence, the broom moving in time with his breath. You could walk past him and miss him entirely, unless you were paying attention. Then you would feel it, that quiet radiance, like sitting near a warm lamp on a winter night. One spring, Elder Wen stopped coming to morning service. He didn't light the incense, didn't sweep, didn't bow. He stayed in his small corner room beside the main hall, lying on his straw mat with hands folded gently over his chest. He was dying. The news spread quickly. Monks whispered in the corridors. Some feared, some mourned. Some tried to distract themselves with chores. But one by one, they made their way to his room. To say goodbye, to ask for wisdom, to seek some final teaching. But Elder Wen said almost nothing. He just smiled. That same soft smile, unmoved by sorrow, unafraid of what came next. One young monk sat at his side and finally asked, "Master, are you not afraid?" Elder Wen opened his eyes. "Afraid of what?" he whispered. "Of leaving." The old monk chuckled softly, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Leave where?" He looked around his humble room. "There is nowhere to go." Another monk asked, "What is your final instruction?" Elder Wen blinked slowly, then raised one trembling hand and pointed to the teacup beside his bed. It was half full. The tea had long gone cold. But the sunlight touched it just so, glinting off the rim. He smiled again, then closed his eyes, and that evening, he passed. As gently as a flame curling into smoke. No struggle, no fanfare, just a long exhale. And stillness. The monks held a memorial. They chanted sutras. They carried his body wrapped in white cloth to the forest. But what they remembered most was not the ceremony. It was the smile. This is the story of death without fear. The final bow of a life lived in awareness. Commentary. In the West, we prepare for death with wills, hospitals, and quiet dread. We pretend it is far away, or we avoid it entirely. But in Zen, death is not the enemy. It is the mirror that shows you whether you were truly alive. Elder Wen was not afraid because he had already practiced dying. Every time he let go of a grudge, every time he stepped aside for someone younger, every time he bowed in silence, releasing his self-importance. The teacup was his final teaching, so ordinary, so overlooked. But it held the whole Dharma. A cup is useful because it is empty. It can hold, receive, release. But if you cling to the cup itself, you miss the tea. If you fear the cup breaking, you never enjoy what it holds. Elder Wen was ready to leave because he had drunk deeply of life. He had tasted the tea, and he didn't cling to the cup. There's a Zen saying, "Let death come like a welcome guest." That doesn't mean we rush toward it. It means we don't turn our back on it. We live with it, like a quiet friend who reminds us not to waste time. Elder Wen's room is empty now, but the moss he watered still thrives. The broom still leans against the wall. The teacup still rests on the low table, cleaned and dry. And his smile lives in the memory of every monk who sat beside him and realized, stillness is not defeat. Stillness is trust. You do not need to fear the end. You only need to live in such a way that when it comes, you can greet it with a breath and a smile. There was once a dog who barked at everything. Leaves in the wind. A child's laughter. The moon. He lived near the edge of a monastery in the countryside. A dusty patch of land behind the kitchen where scraps were tossed and shadows flickered on old stone walls. The monks called him Naga. No one knew where he came from. He was just always there, tail curled, eyes sharp, teeth ready, and always barking. When visitors arrived, he barked. When bells rang, he barked. Even when nothing moved at all, he barked, as if the world itself was suspicious. Some monks avoided him. Too wild, they muttered. Others threw him bread or whispered mantras for his restless soul. But one monk, elderly, slow-moving, soft-spoken, began to sit near him each morning. No words, no food, just presence. He would settle into the grass, cross-legged, a few paces from Naga's resting place. He didn't reach for him, didn't scold the barking. He just sat. At first, Naga barked at him too, low growls, sharp yelps, but the monk remained still, breathing in, breathing out, no threat, no fear, no reaction. Days passed, then weeks. Naga still barked at others, still snarled at passing carts or fluttering robes, but not at the old monk. Eventually, when the monk arrived, Naga would simply lift his head and then rest it again. One morning, the monk placed a small bowl of water nearby. Naga didn't touch it, not for an hour, but as the sun climbed, he finally approached, drank, then sat beside the bowl. The monk said nothing, only smiled. A younger monk watching from the corridor asked later, "Master, how did you calm him? We've tried so many things: food, scolding, chants." The old monk replied, "He barked because the world barked back. He expected resistance. But when he found none, he started listening." Reactivity, the monk would later teach, is like a match near dry grass. One spark, and the fire spreads. But if the grass is damp, soft, grounded, the flame fizzles out. Naga still barked sometimes, but not with the same edge, not with the same fear. And when the old monk passed away years later, Naga lay beside his meditation cushion for 3 days, silent, not whimpering, not barking, just there. Monks and novices alike noticed. A dog who once barked at everything, now holding space for grief, with the stillness of a cloud. There is a saying, when you stop reacting, you start seeing. The dog had seen the one thing no command could teach, that peace isn't taught through force, but through presence that does not flinch. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. The banks of the Ganges shimmered with morning light. Mist curled like white breath from the earth, and birds traced wide arcs above the water. The river flowed as it always had, unhurried, ancient, indifferent. Upon a small rise near the city of Gaya, the Buddha stood. His saffron robes caught the first golden threads of sunlight, and his presence seemed to quiet even the wind. Around him gathered 1,000 ascetics, silent, weathered, lean with years of discipline. Their robes were coarse, their skin bronzed by fire and wind. Their eyes held questions that words could not form. They had come to hear him, not because he promised liberation, but because he had found it. These were men who had walked barefoot on burning sand, who had held their breath until stars blurred in their vision, who had fasted until even hunger grew silent. They had known pain. They had studied sacred fire. They had chanted, scarred, endured. But they had not known peace. And so they came, not to challenge, but to listen. The Buddha began not with praise, nor with rules, nor with doctrine. He began with fire. "All is burning," he said. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind across tall grass. He paused, let the silence stretch, like the space between flames. "All is burning," he repeated. "The I is burning, forms are burning, I consciousness is burning." He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word striking like a drumbeat in the still morning air. Burning with what? With the fire of lust, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion? Some closed their eyes, others frowned. A few leaned forward, their breaths caught. The Buddha looked upon them, not with challenge, but with compassion. "This body you cling to," he said, "it is a wick. This mind you chase through craving, a spark. And each time you grasp, each time you say, 'mine,' you feed the fire." A breeze moved across the Ganges. It stirred the edges of robes. It cooled nothing. The Buddha continued. "The world is ablaze, but not with wood and coal. It burns with longing, with grasping, with thirst." He walked slowly among them, not above, not apart. His steps made no sound. Eyes that chase beauty, ears that crave praise, tongues that seek sweetness, minds that hunger for permanence. He turned and lifted his simple alms bowl. This too is not mine. It holds food today. Tomorrow, it may be empty. I thank it either way. From the back, an old ascetic raised his hand. Are we to abandon joy? He asked. Is not joy the goal? The Buddha smiled faintly. No, he said. Not joy. Only the craving for joy. Let joy arise. Let it come like wind through trees. But do not chase it. Do not bind to it. Do not say, this is mine. For the flame you grasp will burn your hand. Another monk asked quietly, how do we live in a burning world? The Buddha looked at him with eyes deep as a still lake. Like a man who sees the blaze, he said. Who walks with care, breathes with wisdom, and holds no illusion that the fire is shelter. A hush fell over the gathering, not from fear, but from recognition. The fire was not only in the cities, or in war, or in anger. It was inside them, inside each grasping thought, each clenched desire. The Buddha sat upon the earth. He drew a circle in the dust with his finger. Inside this circle, he said, are your perceptions, your feelings, your ideas. They rise like smoke. They change like flame. They disappear like ash. Do not build your home in a fire. A younger monk, no more than 20 summers old, whispered, then where do we dwell, Master? The Buddha looked up. In awareness, he said. In equanimity. In the space between sparks. Be the witness, not the fuel. The monks bowed their heads. Some wept, not from sorrow, but from something else. From release, from clarity, from the sudden lightness of realizing they could put something down. That night, they built no fires. There were no chants, no ceremonies. They ate simply, drank river water, and sat in silence. But the silence was not empty. It was watchful. Each monk sat with his own flickering flame. Some remembered the pain of hunger they had forced upon themselves. Others remembered the pride they had felt when praised for discipline. Some saw anger they had not named, others grief, and they did not suppress these fires. They simply watched. And in the watching, something shifted. Not extinguished, but no longer fed. In the days that followed, the change was quiet but real. Monks who had once worshipped sacred flame, who had walked barefoot on coals, branded their skin, sat in the sun for days, now turned to a gentler discipline. They practiced release. They rose with the sun. They swept the courtyard slowly. They bowed not to fire, but to understanding. When visitors asked them what the Buddha had taught that morning, they did not recite scriptures. They did not speak of rebirth or karma or cosmology. They said only, he showed us the fire and told us we did not have to live in it. The fire sermon was spoken many times across the years, but none more powerful than that first morning on the river bank, when the smoke from the city's cooking fires curled upward, mirroring the craving in every heart, and the Buddha, with nothing in his hands and peace in his gaze, simply said, let it burn, let it pass, and do not be consumed. The Master was dying. Not suddenly, not tragically, just quietly, like a season completing itself. His name was Master Togen, and he had taught for over 40 years. He never raised his voice, never insisted, never asked to be followed. But people came to him, pilgrims, monks, farmers, children. Because when he looked at you, you felt seen beyond your name. Now, his breath was thin, his hands still, his body a whisper of what it once was. The disciples gathered at his bedside, each wondering the same thing. Would he speak? Would he leave them with one final truth, a farewell teaching, a verse, a koan? They waited, hearts leaning forward. But Master Togen said nothing, not even a word. He only gestured, weakly, to the small table beside his mat. Upon it stood a single candle, lit and steady. The wax had melted low. The flame burned soft but sure. The master's eyes lingered on it. Then he closed them and let go. The room held its breath. The disciples watched the candle. It flickered once, then twice, and just as the master's body cooled, the candle went out. No wind, no touch. It simply ended. This is the story of teaching through presence, of the final lesson not spoken, but lived. Commentary. We often believe the greatest teachings must be loud, dramatic, revolutionary, clear. But in Zen, the most profound truths are quiet. They arrive not with thunder, but with the stillness of a candle extinguishing itself. Master Togen's disciples wanted words, something to cling to quote, to remember. But he gave them something deeper, a mirror. The candle was his body, burning with presence, giving light, warming others, and when its time came, it did not resist, it did not protest, it simply completed its purpose and disappeared. That is the nature of life. To arrive, to offer, to pass. To resist this is to suffer. To accept it is to awaken. Some monks cried. Some stared at the floor. But one young disciple remained still, eyes on the wick. He bowed deeply and said, "I understand." The abbot later asked him, "What did you understand?" The young monk replied, "Nothing lasts, but everything lights the way while it's here." We fear death, but what we fear more is the idea of being forgotten, of being meaningless. So we seek last words, final victories, something to prove we existed. But Master Togen left only a flame, because the point was not to be remembered. It was to burn fully while here. The candle did not save its wax, did not ration its glow. It gave everything, slowly, humbly, until there was nothing left to give. And then it bowed out. That was his teaching. There is a Zen phrase, "When the light is gone, do not seek it in the ashes." The disciples learned this that day, not from a sermon, but from the absence that remained. Master Togen lives on, not in statues, not in scriptures, not in recorded sayings, but in how the monks now move, with care, with presence, with awareness that each moment is a wick, each breath a flame. So when your time comes, be like the candle. Don't worry about your legacy. Focus on your light. The young monk spoke with confidence. He had studied for years. He had memorized the sutras, debated the Dharma, written essays on emptiness and non-self. Now he stood before Master Obaku, hoping to impress him. "What is the ultimate truth of Buddhism?" he asked, bowing low. The question was polished, prepared, even reverent. But Obaku said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward and shouted, loud, sudden, like thunder cracking a still lake. The monk stumbled backward, heart racing. His thoughts vanished. His pride scattered like startled birds, and for a moment, just one brief, breathless moment, his mind stopped. No questions, no answers, just space, raw and awake. That was the lesson. A shout. Not of anger, but of compassion. Not to belittle, but to break. To shatter the walls of thinking that separate seeker from truth. In the Zen tradition, this is known as katsu, a fierce cry. A single wordless eruption that pierces through the mind's constant noise. Obaku used it like a blade, not to wound, but to cut away illusion, to jolt the student out of the fog of thought. Because sometimes, you don't need more understanding. You need a wake-up call. Think of a dream. You're walking through it, believing it, responding to it. Then someone shouts your name. You jolt awake and realize none of it was real. Obaku's shout was like that, not a teaching, a waking. Years later, the monk returned. He bowed before Obaku and said, "I finally understand why you shouted." Obaku smiled and said, "Then forget that I ever did." Because even the memory of awakening can become another concept, another prison. Zen cuts not just through delusion, but through the attachment to insight itself. Obaku was a teacher of few words, but when he spoke or shouted, he struck deep. Once another student asked him, "What is the path to liberation?" Obaku raised his fist. The student said nothing, then bowed. Because in that moment he understood. The path was this. Not words about liberation, but the raw, silent, direct presence of the fist before him. Western minds often recoil from this. We're trained to expect kindness to be soft, truth to be calm, teachers to be gentle. But in Zen, compassion doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it roars, because the cage of the thinking mind is strong, and it takes a powerful noise to break it. Obaku's shout was not personal, it was not performance. It was pure action, free from hesitation, free from agenda. A sound that came from no self, and landed in the heart like a bell. Another story is told. A monk was dozing off during meditation. Obaku walked behind him, raised his staff, and struck the ground beside him, hard. The monk jolted upright, eyes wide. The master said only, "If you sleep through life, you will dream of Zen, but never wake to it." The monk bowed. He never fell asleep in the hall again. These moments are not cruel. They are kindness without comfort, because comfort can lull us into dreaming. But Zen is the practice of waking, again and again, until waking becomes your natural state, until presence is all you need. Imagine someone drowning in shallow water. You don't throw them a book about swimming. You pull them up, sometimes roughly, but always with love. That is Obaku's shout, a hand reaching through illusion, grabbing you by the robe and saying, "Wake up." Commentary. Not all teachings arrive gently. Some arrive like a storm, like cold water to the face. like a sound so loud it shakes the thoughts out of your spine. Because truth is not fragile. It doesn't need to be whispered. It just needs to be heard. And often the most compassionate thing a teacher can do is stop trying to explain and simply interrupt. Interrupt the story. Interrupt the me. Interrupt the years of polite ego dressed up as spirituality. Obaku knew this. He wasn't teaching Buddhism, he was teaching freedom. And sometimes freedom begins not with understanding, but with a single sharp, sacred shout. If you walk away from Zen with nothing but quotes, you've missed it. If you remember the stories but never felt the cut, you're still dreaming. But if something within you, some soft center you didn't know you had, felt this story not as words, but as thunder, then maybe, just maybe, you've begun to wake up. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. The novice stepped forward, eyes low, robes gathered neatly in his arms. He had heard whispers of the great master Joshu, of his clarity, of his presence, of the way his words, brief, sharp, could undo years of illusion in a single moment. And so, the novice came with a question, simple, ancient, and burning. He bowed deeply. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Joshu looked at him, quiet as a still pond, then said, Mu. Just that. One word, Mu. The novice blinked. He had expected a teaching, a parable, perhaps even a sermon on interdependence or karma. But all he got was this one syllable, Mu. Number not no, as in rejection, but Mu, as in as in empty, as in beyond yes or no. The novice opened his mouth to speak again, to clarify, to plead for context. But Joshu had already returned to trimming the bonsai. And the novice was left standing there, holding a question that would not let go. Does a dog have Buddha nature? In the Mahayana tradition, the answer is yes. All beings have Buddha nature, even the smallest ant, even the vilest criminal, even the barking dog on the dusty street. The Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. So why did Joshu say Mu? It wasn't to contradict the sutras, it was to shock the mind out of seeking answers like stones in a riverbed. For weeks, the novice could not sleep. He replayed the moment again and again. He wrote MU in his journal. He whispered it during walking meditation. He shouted it into the wind. He carried it like a thorn in the foot, every step made sharper by its presence. One night, a senior monk approached him in the meditation hall. "Why do you look so troubled?" he asked. The novice bowed his head. "Master Joshu gave me a koan. Does a dog have Buddha nature?" He said, "Mu! I don't understand." The monk smiled gently. "You won't." "Not yet." The novice frowned. "Then what should I do?" "Burn your logic," said the monk, "and sit." In the centuries that followed, Joshu's Mu became the first koan in the Gateless Gate, a collection of paradoxical encounters meant to tear open the mind. And it is said that some monks meditated on Mu for 5 years, 10, even 20. Not because the question was hard, but because the answer required the death of the one asking it. Mu is not a word, it is a doorway, but it has no latch, no hinges, no frame. Only a gate that exists because the mind insists there must be one. And the moment you stop trying to walk through it, it disappears. The novice became obsessed. He stopped eating. He stopped speaking. He carried Mu through every moment like a fever dream. He touched it while pouring tea. He chewed it like rice. He sat with it in the dark until the wind outside sounded like it was chanting back to him. M, m, m. He began to tremble. And still, no clarity, no breakthrough, only silence. One dawn, after 300 days of silent retreat, he broke. He stood in the rain, lifted his head to the grey sky, and shouted, "What is Mu?" The sound echoed against the temple walls. A bird fluttered. A branch creaked, but nothing answered. He fell to his knees, not in defeat, in surrender, not to ignorance, but to not knowing. And in that moment, he let go, not just of the question, but of the one who needed the answer. And that's when it happened. Not a flash, not a thunderclap, just a quiet shift, a falling away, and everything returned. The wind, the breath, the feeling of water on his skin, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. Nothing extraordinary, and yet everything was different. He stood, he laughed, he bowed. Later, when the novice returned to Yoshu, the master asked no questions. He looked once in the monk's eyes and simply said, "Good." Nothing more, because no explanation was needed. You cannot explain Mu, you can only become it. Commentary. In Western terms, we often ask, is it this or that? Zen asks, who is asking? Yoshu's Mu is not a negation of the dog's Buddha nature. It is a negation of the very framework of the question. To ask, does a dog have Buddha nature, is to separate Buddha nature from dog, to assume that it's something a being might possess. But Buddha nature is not a possession. It is not a label. It is the breath before thought, the space before division. Mu is the erasure of the chalkboard before the question is even written. Zen does not want you to answer the question. It wants the question to consume you. Until there's nothing left. Until only presence remains. Until even Mu is forgotten. And the wind in the pines is enough. The gateless gate is open to all. But to pass through, you must stop trying to pass. You must stop searching for the latch. There is no Mu outside yourself. It is not in the words of sutras, not in the mind's debate. It is here, now, when all seeking stops and the moment is allowed to be, just as it is, even a barking dog, even your own confusion, even the silence after reading this sentence. She had heard hundreds of stories, pain layered on pain, grief knotted with shame, rage disguised as silence. Dr. Anjali Mehta was a seasoned therapist, 47 years old, calm voice, warm eyes, a room filled with soft lamps, quiet bookshelves, and a single blue armchair that caught the afternoon light just so. She had learned over time that her work was not to fix people, but to witness them, to hold space, to wait, to not flinch when the truth arrived. That afternoon, her 2 p.m. client sat stiffly. Teenage boy, 17, sleeves pulled over his hands, a stare that hovered somewhere behind her shoulder. He didn't speak for the first 8 minutes. She didn't force it. She just sat, breathing gently, grounded, present. When he finally did speak, it was one sentence. "Everyone talks like they know what I'm feeling. They don't." She didn't nod too quickly, didn't say, "I understand." Instead, she let silence do what words often can't. "There's a saying in Zen," she offered softly, "that the teacher is like a mirror. They don't speak for you. They just show you where the dust has gathered." The boy blinked, looked at her, and, for the first time in weeks, said something more. There is a deep wisdom in the pause, the moment between a question and an answer, the breath between emotion and reaction, the silence that honors pain without trying to patch it. Anjali once had a mentor who said, "You don't need the right words, you need the right presence." She had taken that to heart. Her patients didn't always thank her, didn't always improve quickly, but many came back. Because there aren't many places in the world where someone will sit with your brokenness without trying to sweep it away. She remembered an older woman once, widowed after 42 years. The woman cried for 45 minutes straight. Anjali didn't interrupt, didn't analyze, just handed her a tissue and stayed. At the end of the session, the woman whispered, "You're the only person who didn't tell me to be strong." Anjali said nothing, but later she wept, not from sadness, but from the honor of witnessing someone's unguarded truth. Therapists are trained to listen, but Anjali had learned to listen beneath the words, the tightening of a jaw, the hesitation before a name, the breath that catches after, "I'm fine." Sometimes her job wasn't to provide answers. It was to be the room where the storm could pass. She had a small bell on her desk, never rang it, just kept it there to remind herself, return to this moment, over and over. One evening, after a long day, she wrote in her journal, "People come in with tangled lives. I don't untangle them, I just hold the threads until they can begin to see the pattern." The boy in the blue hoodie came back the next week, and the next. He still didn't say much, but he sat and listened, and didn't flinch when she said his name. It was a start. And sometimes that is enough. Every morning, just before dawn, he sat at the corner of Main and River, cross-legged, still, wrapped in an old grey coat with no buttons. People called him the homeless monk. No one knew his real name. No one remembered when he'd first appeared. But he was always there. Rain or shine, winter or summer. Sitting silently beneath the faded mural of a rising sun. He never asked for money, never held a sign, just a small tin bowl at his side. Sometimes people dropped coins into it, sometimes fruit, sometimes nothing at all. He never seemed to mind. Children were the first to notice him. "Is he sleeping?" one asked. "No," said her mother. "He's meditating, I think." And the child, with all the clarity of someone who hasn't yet forgotten how to see, replied, "He looks like he's listening to the whole city breathe." One barista left him a scone each Wednesday. A florist once placed a single lily in his bowl. An accountant gave him a scarf one January dash, which he later passed on to someone colder than he was. Some scoffed. "He's just lazy," said a man in a BMW. "He's just weird," muttered a teen with earbuds in. But others stopped, only for a second. But they did, because something in his stillness felt like a mirror. One afternoon, a reporter tried to interview him, held out a microphone, asked for his name, his background, his reason. The man opened one eye, smiled gently, and said, "I own nothing, but I belong to everything." Then closed his eye again. The story never aired. Too quiet. Too strange. No hook. But those who paid attention began to notice something. Around him, time slowed. Not literally, but in his presence, people put away their phones, looked up, paused. The world, so hungry for more, seemed to forget itself. For just a moment, there's a teaching in Buddhism. To renounce is not to lose, but to see clearly what you never needed. Some thought he had lost everything, a job, a home, maybe his mind. But maybe he had simply let go of identity, of striving, of the illusion that fulfillment lies in accumulation. One day, a man in a suit stopped and asked, "Don't you want something more?" The monk opened both eyes this time. "I already have it," he said. "What's that?" "A clear sky, a passing breeze, and no hunger in my mind." He didn't preach, didn't convert, but every day his presence was a sermon without words, a reminder that peace isn't a destination. It's a decision. Then one morning he was gone. No note, no trail. Just the faint indentation where he used to sit. The mural behind him had faded a bit more, but someone had drawn a small lotus in chalk right where his bowl used to be. The barista still leaves a scone each Wednesday. The florist still visits, and the accountant, now retired, says he meditates by that wall, not to become something new, but to remember who he was before the noise. And in that city, on that street, somewhere between the rush and the silence, a memory breathes, a man who owned nothing, but gave everything by simply being still. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. The Buddha sat beneath a sal tree where the light filtered through in flickering gold. The breeze played gently with the hem of his robe, and the scent of early jasmine lingered in the air. Around him, the monks gathered like ripples around a pebble dropped in a still pond. Quiet, present, steady. They bowed one by one and took their seats on the grass, robes the colour of ochre and clay. The forest around them hummed with life, birds calling from high branches, the distant crack of bamboo, and the low murmur of wind moving through tall grass. The Buddha's eyes remained half lowered, still and soft. Then from the circle, a young monk rose. He was thin, his frame taut with discipline, but his brow was furrowed, his lips pressed with quiet unrest. He stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "I have studied the teachings as best I can. I rise before dawn. I recite every sutra. I memorize every verse. I follow every precept. And still, I suffer. Still my mind is troubled. I fear I've become attached to the very teachings meant to free me." He hesitated. Am I clinging to the Dharma itself? The Buddha looked upon him gently. "You remind me of a traveler," he said. "Let me tell you a story." The monks settled deeper into stillness. The forest too seemed to pause. "There was once a man," the Buddha began, "wandering through a thick and treacherous forest. The trees were close, the thorns sharp. On all sides he was hemmed in by danger, wild beasts, hunger, cries in the distance that made his skin crawl. For hours, maybe days, he pushed forward, uncertain and afraid, until he came to a wide, roaring river. On the other side, he could see sunlight falling on an open path. He saw smoke curling from a distant hut. Safety, rest, the way forward." The Buddha paused, letting the image take shape. But there was no bridge, no boat. The current was fierce. He could not swim across without being swept away. So the man worked. He cut branches, wove reeds, bent saplings into shape. With patience, sweat, and determination, he fashioned a raft, just strong enough to carry him. He clutched it tightly, guided it across the swirling water. His heart pounded with fear, but he reached the far bank, soaked, trembling, but alive. The Buddha's eyes swept slowly across the circle of monks. "Now imagine," he continued, "that once on land, the man looked at the raft and said, 'This has saved me. This is precious. I will carry it with me always.' And so he lifted it onto his shoulders and continued his journey, the heavy wood digging into his back, slowing his steps, wearing him down." A faint rustle of recognition moved through the group. "Would that make sense?" the Buddha asked. The monks shook their heads. "Of course not," the Buddha said. "The raft served its purpose. It brought him across. To carry it afterward, to cling to it, would only bring suffering." He turned to the young monk. "So too with the Dharma." The monk blinked, uncertain. "But the teachings are sacred," he said. "Aren't they to be kept close? Aren't they the source of liberation?" The Buddha nodded. "They are sacred, but sacred does not mean permanent. The Dharma is not a cage. It is not a burden to be shouldered forever. It is a tool, a raft, a means to cross the river of confusion and craving. Once you have crossed, you need not drag the boat behind you." Another monk raised his hand. "Master," he asked softly, "what if one forgets or finds themselves back at the river?" "Then rebuild the raft," said the Buddha. "Relearn, begin again, but never mistake the raft for the shore. The Dharma is not the destination, it is the guide." A hush followed, filled only by the hush of the wind and the rhythmic clicking of cicadas. Later that evening, as the sun descended behind the line of trees and turned the sky to a warm, bruised lavender, the monks returned to their huts, some with new questions, others with lighter hearts. But the young monk lingered. He wandered to the river near the monastery, where the water curled gently around stones and reeds. He sat on the bank, knees pulled in, and listened. The moon had begun its slow rise, casting silver light across the ripples. The monk breathed deeply. He thought of the teachings he had memorized, the sutras chanted, the rules obeyed, the rituals performed. Each had been a plank, a vine, a thread in the raft that carried him across his inner storm. He remembered the fear that had driven him to this path, the grief of his father's death, the anger he once held like a fire in his chest, the shame of worldly desire. Each teaching had helped him cross some inner current, but now, here he sat, dry but weary, clutching the raft as though it were still necessary. And he saw. He had carried not just the teachings, but his pride in them, his fear of failure, his guilt for each imperfect thought, his grasping for perfection, and all of these too were rafts, built to carry him through old pain, meant to be honored, yes, but then let go. He closed his eyes. The breeze shifted. The night deepened. By morning, he rose and returned to the Buddha. He bowed low, his hands open, his heart quiet. I have crossed, he said softly, and the Buddha replied, then walk freely. No further instruction, no ceremony. Just a smile, the kind that sees without needing to explain. Because truth, like a raft, is not meant to be worshipped. It is meant to be used, held for a time, then released. And so the monk walked on, not empty, but unburdened. He still chanted, still meditated, still studied the sutras. But now he did so not out of fear, not to be perfect, but because he understood their purpose. They were not chains, they were maps, and once you arrive, you do not need the map to breathe. Years later, when a new monk came with the same question, full of guilt, clinging to rules like a man clutching driftwood, he told him of the raft. He pointed to the river and smiled. Every morning at 6:15 she opened the curtains. The light crept in slowly, soft and golden, and the photo on the mantel caught it just right. It was old, sepia-toned, edges curled like leaves in autumn. A man in uniform, smiling, handsome, still young. Her husband, gone now for 17 years. Miriam never moved the photo. It stayed on the same spot. Third tile from the right, 2 inches from the lamp. She didn't talk to it, didn't cry over it. She simply saw it. Every day, grief for her had stopped being a storm. It had become weather, something you dress for, something you feel without needing to fight. Once, her granddaughter asked, "Why don't you get rid of that old photo? You have better ones on your phone." Miriam just smiled. That one isn't for looking. It's for remembering. Her husband had died in his sleep. No warnings, no pain, just silence. She found him in the morning, hands still curled as if holding a dream. She didn't scream, didn't collapse. She sat beside him, held his hand and whispered, "Thank you." People told her to be strong. She didn't try. She simply continued. At the temple nearby, the monks would speak of impermanence, of how everything changes, how attachment creates suffering. Miriam understood this. Not as an idea, but as a reality. She loved her husband deeply, but she did not clutch him. Even in his absence, she let him be gone. And in doing so, he never truly left. There's a Zen teaching. To hold a butterfly, you must open your palm. Miriam didn't keep a shrine, didn't tell his story over and over. She just lived in a way that would make him proud. She tended the garden they once planted together. She drank the coffee he used to brew. She folded his shirts one last time and gave them away. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she didn't want her love to become a cage. One day, a neighbor lost her husband. She came to Miriam, eyes red, voice shaking. "I don't know how to live without him." Miriam poured tea, sat with her, said nothing at first, then quietly offered, "You don't live without him. You live with the part of him that still breathes in you." The neighbor sobbed. And Miriam did not stop her. She just placed a hand on hers and let it be. Love doesn't end. It changes shape. And grief, too, is a form of love, one that knows how to bow. Miriam is older now, hands soft with age, memories flickering at the edges, but she still opens the curtains each morning, still lets the light find the photo, not to bring him back, but to let him go again, gently, lovingly, without holding. In one hand, he carries a book, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the perfection of wisdom. In the other, he wields a sword, long, luminous, and aflame with clarity. He rides a lion, not to show power, but to symbolize the fearlessness of insight. This is Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, where Avalokiteshvara brings compassion, where Samantabhadra brings vow and action. Manjushri brings the sharp, radiant truth. His name means gentle glory, but his wisdom is not soft. It does not comfort. It cuts. It slices through illusion with the precision of a blade honed on silence. The sword he carries is not for battle. It is for discernment. It separates appearance from reality, self from no self, thought from knowing. It reveals what we are too afraid to see and too free not to see. In the old sutras, it is said that Manjushri's wisdom is so sharp, he was enlightened before the Buddhas of the past. He is the eternal teenager of the Mahayana pantheon, ever young, ever clear, ever unburdened by delusion. Where others hesitate, Manjushri speaks. Where others follow rules, Manjushri asks why. Where others cling to views, Manjushri lets go, again and again and again. One day, a monk asked him, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" And Manjushri drew his sword in the air, then lowered it slowly, as if slicing through something invisible. That was his answer. Because words can't always hold wisdom. Sometimes it must be shown. In Zen temples, the figure of Manjushri is often placed behind the Roshi's seat, not as decoration, but as a reminder that true teaching must be rooted in clarity, that every word spoken should come from a place that has already cut through ego, opinion, attachment. The teacher, like Manjushri, must see clearly before they speak. There is a famous koan. A young monk full of doctrine said to the master, "I've memorized the Heart Sutra. I understand emptiness. There is no I, no ear, no mind, no path, no attainment." The master pointed to a bowl of rice and said, "Then eat, because understanding is not the point. Living is." This is what Manjushri teaches, wisdom that is not locked in scriptures, but embodied, applied, lived. The sword is not aggressive, it is necessary to wake us, to free us, to carve away the clinging and the confusion until only truth remains. Not an idea, but a mirror with no dust. There's a story told in the mountains. A disciple sat meditating, trying to silence his thoughts. He came to Manjushri in prayer and asked, "Please cut away my illusions." That night, in a dream, Manjushri appeared. He said nothing, only lifted his sword and placed it gently on the disciple's shoulder, not to strike, but to remind him, the blade is not outside you, it is within. Commentary. Manjushri does not give you answers. He gives you the means to see for yourself. That is his wisdom, not dogma, but discernment. Not belief, but perception stripped of filter. The sword cuts two ways. It cuts through ignorance, but also through comfort. It forces us to ask, what have I built my life on? And what happens when that is no longer solid? Can I let go? Can I breathe? Even when the ground beneath me vanishes. Wisdom is not knowing more. It is needing less. It is silence that doesn't need applause. It is clarity that does not waver in the dark. It is the ability to sit in confusion and not flinch, to stand before illusion and not bow, to name what is and let go of what is not. The lion Manjushri rides is not a beast of war. It is the mind that has been tamed. The roar is no longer fear. It is the roar of reality unfiltered. The courage to face things as they are. There's a quiet danger in spiritual life. We want wisdom to feel good, to validate us, to comfort the parts of us that ache. But Manjushri reminds us, true wisdom will sometimes hurt. It will dismantle the story we've told ourselves. It will whisper, "You are not who you think you are." And if we listen, the story ends and life begins. In your own practice, the sword appears in many forms. The question you can't answer. The moment you realize you've been wrong. The teacher who looks you in the eye and says nothing because anything they say would only get in the way. That is the sword, cutting gently, so you can see clearly. You don't have to fear it. You have to wield it. In kindness, in honesty, in the decision to no longer live half asleep. When you chant, chant with the sword. When you bow, bow with the sword. When you love, love with the sword. Not to harm, but to see clearly what love is. Because love without wisdom is sentiment, and wisdom without love is cold. But together, they are Manjushri and Avalokiteshvara, and the path itself. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.